When you want the user to enter something from the keyboard, C has an input function called scanf. To use the scanf function, you have to first include the stdio header file. So that's again for all the standard input and output functions. The scanf statement has to end with a semicolon, as do all statements in C. And the scanf doesn't have a prompt, so what you have to do is you have to use a printf statement to print the prompt first, and then you can use the scanf function to read in the input. So here's an example of prompting the user for a number. We're going to print the prompt using printf, so print enter your age, so that will show up. And then the scanf function is going to read in the number. So when you execute these two statements together, the prompt will print enter your age, and then the user types in a number, and that's going to be stored in the variable. So the first argument to the scanf function is a control string that specifies what kind of value the user is supposed to enter. In this case, %d means an integer. And the second is the variable into which the value is going to be read. So when the user types in a 33, that gets stored in the variable age. The little and or ampersand operator before the variable name is necessary in the scanf statement. So what the ampersand sign says is it's the address of the variable. So age is the variable, the ampersand sign age is the address of the variable. So it's where it actually is in memory. So the scanf function, in order to be able to store a value in the variable, has to know where it is. So it gives the address or the location of the variable so that the value can be placed in that location. Now in C, it's possible to read in more than one thing in a single scanf function. So here's an example where, first of all, I have a comment that says we're going to prompt the user and then read in integers. So we're going to have a prompt, the printf, that says please enter 2 integers. And then the scanf function is going to read both things into variables num1 and num2. So in this case, the control string is going to have 2 %ds because we're reading in 2 integer values. And again, we have to have the ampersand symbol in front of the variables. That specifies the location of the variables, so the scanf function, when the user types in values, can actually store them in the variables. And then once we read them in, we might want to, as the comment says, echo print the integers by just printing out what the user entered. So here's an example of what this might look like. It has, first of all, the prompt that says please enter 2 integers. And so then the user might type 5 and several spaces and then 9. And the scanf function is going to read the 5 into the first variable num1 and then the 9 into the second variable num2. And then the printf after that echo prints you entered 5 and 9. Now this is important. When reading in numbers, the scanf function is going to ignore all white space characters. So if I type in spaces here or even an enter key, the scanf function will ignore all of the white space looking for the next number. So here's an example of what we would have in the main function of a program that has input and output. It's going to prompt the user for the length of a side of a square, and then it's going to print the area. So this shows the statements that would be in the body of the main function. So first of all, we're going to print an instruction that says we will use units of meters. Then we're going to have a printf that prints a prompt, enter the length of a side. And then we have a scanf that reads into a variable side, again reading into the address of side. And in this case, the control string specifies that this is a float variable. Then we're going to calculate the area of the square, side times side, and store that in another variable. And then we're going to print it out in a nice sentence format that says for a square with a side of, and with 1 decimal place the value of side, the area is, and then with 0.2f, the value of the area squared, m squared for meters squared. So here's the entire file without comments, just so it fits here. So first we need to include the standard IO header file so we can have both the input and the output. And then inside of the main function, first of all, we declare our variables for the side and the area of the square. And then the statements we had before, we're going to print the units of meters, we're going to print the prompt, then we read into the variable side, we calculate the area of the square, we print out the results, and then return 0 at the end of the main function. Now, reading in characters is different because every single key that you hit is a valid character. So let's say we have two character variables, let1 and let2, and we're going to prompt the user for two characters and then echo print them. So I'm going to have a printf that prints enter two letters separated by a space. Then I have a control string that says %c%c, so we're reading in two characters into the locations or the address of two character variables, let1 and let2, and then we're going to echo print the value of let1 and let2. All right, so when we actually run this, the prompt is going to say enter two letters separated by a space. So if I follow directions and type in T and then space and then B, the first character that I entered, T, is going to get read into the first variable, let1. The second character, which is the space, is going to be read into the second variable, let2. So it's going to print the first letter is T, the second letter is space. So every single character that you enter is a valid character. So it's not going to skip over white space like it does for numbers when reading in characters. So if I actually follow directions here and separate with the space, I'm not going to get my two letters of the alphabet. The other thing is that I typed in the T, the space, and the B. In the code, I've only read in the T and the space. The B is actually still sitting there. So whatever you enter when you type in values from the keyboard, that actually goes into an input buffer. So it doesn't go directly from the keyboard into variables in a scanf. It goes from the keyboard to an input buffer, and then the scanf function reads from the input buffer. So in the code before, when I typed in T space B, the code read in the T in the space. The B is still sitting there in the input buffer. So if the user types in extra things when prompted, all of that stuff is going to stay in the input buffer, and it's going to still be there when the next scanf function is trying to read something in. So in order to handle that issue, some compilers have a function that will flush out the input buffer. So you get rid of everything. So before you prompt the user and try to read something in, you flush out the input buffer in case there was extra stuff already there so that the user can start fresh. So for compilers that don't have any kind of flush function, we're going to have to wait until we get to loops to see how we can read in all of the extra characters, basically to get rid of them from the input buffer.